A few months ago, we returned to this mini-series where we told you what happened of some circuits that hosted Formula but for different reasons ended up leaving the category, and their fate has been very different. And in this remake, in our first episode, we told you about the fate of circuits like Buenos Aires in Argentina, Long Beach, the Sochi circuit in Russia, and the Scandinavian Raceway in Sweden. And this time, it's the moment for part 2 of this story, where we'll tell you the fate of 4 other circuits around the world. What happened to the tracks after the top category left? And is there a chance that they could return to Formula 1 in the near future? So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to chapter 2 of the fate of the circuits that left Formula 1. Today's story starts at a circuit that appeared on the Formula 1 calendar in 2020 and 2021. But its brief appearance will take us to the old continent, more precisely to Portugal, to learn about the history of the Portimao circuit. The official name of the track is Autódromo Internacional do Algarve, a permanent circuit located right in the Portimao region in Portugal. Created in 2008, its history is relatively recent compared to other circuits worldwide, and it wasn't originally designed for Formula racing. But in addition, it was the home of the Portuguese Grand Prix in the 2020 and 2021 editions of the Formula 1 calendar. The history of this circuit begins in 2002 when local businessmen and governments had the idea to create a racing circuit. This would enhance the region's image and increase tourism in a city already known for its beauty. However, for the local government, it was impossible to raise the funding needed for this project, and for several years, the idea simply remained up in the air, unable to be carried out. It was 3 years after that attempt that the Ministry of Economy and Environment of Portugal gave the green light to grant the budget, environmental permits, and land to build the track, as well as giving them a 10-year exemption from tax payments. Once they finally got the resources they had long requested. Track construction began in February 2008, led by Parkagar and architect Ricardo Pina. In only 7 months, the circuit was finished and opened with a Superbike World Championship race. Thanks to having the highest certification from the International Motorcycling Federation from the start. In its early years, this track lacked the top Federación Internacional del Automóvil grade for Formula 1 events. It only had 1T homologation, allowing all motorsport competitions except Formula 1. The circuit could be used for top category tests, and Formula 1 took advantage of this with several teams doing tests on that track, which was actually part of the 1999 ITES preseason. From then on, this circuit hosted various motorsport events, including GPTU tests, the Federación Internacional del Automóvil GTI World Championship, and European competitions. But still doesn't host top events like MotoGP or Formula 1 Grand Prix. In fact, shortly after, they had financial problems that stopped other projects related to this track, such as a hotel, a technology park, or housing that was being built near the area where the circuit was located. Afterward, the state had to bail out the circuit, allowing all pending projects to finish. But the idea was reinforced that, for the circuit to be a success, they needed more high-profile events at this track. However, it wouldn't be until 2020 that the top motor racing categories in the world would come to this circuit to compete. That's due to the 2020 video demonetizing virus pandemic. Formula 1 and MotoGP found themselves needing to create emergency schedules in order to have a Formula 1 season. Portimao volunteered to replace dropped rounds that season. Formula 1 found its location ideal and considered hosting races there. So, on October 25, 2020 Formula 1 raced at this circuit for the first time. After 24 years, the Portuguese Grand Prix EGO returned. In 2021, some original calendar rounds were still cancelled due to coronavirus. Portugal hosted a Formula 1 Grand Prix for the second time in its history. Despite their success, as both drivers and fans loved the track's challenging corners and elevation changes. After the 2021 edition, the top category did not return to this circuit in the following years. So, with this in mind, let's answer the video's first question. Why did Formula 1 leave the sports circuit? Many people may suspect it, but the answer is simple. Portugal and this circuit were never in Formula 1's official plans. They were just emergency resources used to replace rounds removed from the calendar. Portimao lacked a Formula 1 contract, and there were no real plans to bring the series to the Portuguese roller coaster. And once things went back to normal in the world, in 2022, Formula 1 simply went on its way, bringing back the rounds that already had contracts. It was simply things returning to their natural course. At that time, the Portuguese authorities showed no interest in hosting a round again, but that has changed significantly in recent days. But well, once we understand this, let's move on to see what has happened to the circuit after Formula left. The track still exists and holds both the Grade 1 certification for hosting Formula 1 Grand Prix and the highest International Motorcycling Federation certification, allowing it to host top motorcycle events like MotoGP. In addition, all the buildings that were constructed over the years have been kept in good condition, and competitions continue to take place as usual. On a circuit that remains in great condition, it still looks impressive. The track has been resurfaced over the years to suit modern times. It still hosts events like Superbikes, the European Le Mans Series, and Formula 4 Championships. Its main event now is a MotoGP round. This circuit has been visited since 2020, so the track remains active and fully functional. Now then, knowing this, Formula 1 could return to this circuit in the near future. Many of you probably already know, but it's not about whether it could return or not, but when it will. And at the end of 2025, there was a huge surprise when Portimao returned to the calendar for the 2027 season, after signing a 2-year contract with the top category of motorsport. This surprised many fans, since it was known that Formula was negotiating with countries like Thailand, South Africa, or Rwanda for a calendar spot. And at least for now, the winner of all those negotiations ended up being the circuit in Portugal, which will have a short contract, only 2 years, where I think they'll evaluate how the event works. And from there, we could either have it in Formula 1 for many more years, or they could leave again. But at least for 2 more seasons, we'll have the Portuguese roller coaster without fear of being wrong. One of the best circuits on the planet is on the calendar, and definitely a Grand Prix that won't leave anyone indifferent when Formula 1 returns. In the year 2027, for the second story of this video, we'll have to travel to the land of the rising sun, a journey from Europe to Asia to learn about the circuit that only had 2 Grand Prix in its history and is located in Okayama Prefecture. The circuit we're going to talk about was previously known as Tanaka International Circuit AIDA, and today it's known as Okayama International Circuit. A track located in the prefecture that bears the same name and that in La Formula Circuit. The history of this circuit began in the 1980s as an experiment. Its construction comes from the great Japanese golf course tycoon Hayami Tanaka, who wondered if it was possible to apply the concept of golf club memberships to motorsport venues, with the intention of offering wealthy people the possibility to enjoy their high-performance cars in a controlled environment. By 1989, he set his plan in motion, sold some of his golf courses, and thus began financing the construction of the circuit. He planned to charge his members 15 million yen, roughly $120,000 then, so that anyone who wanted could become a member of the circuit and thus enjoy all the amenities that this circuit would offer. And even though it might seem like an extremely risky idea to do something like that, the guy knew how to sell. And he managed to get 350 people to buy memberships from him and to close deals with Toyota and Nissan for the use of the circuit. Using the funds, he bought land in the Okayama Mountains and built there. The racetrack, where supposedly $100 million were invested in the construction of the track, would have a length of 0.7 kilometers. Completed in 1990, the circuit was inaugurated as Aida Tanaka International Circuit, with Tanaka International standing for Tanaka International and Aida, referring to the city nearest the circuit. Motorsport enthusiasts found themselves with a small circuit, yes, but with challenging corners and some interesting elevation changes. By 1992, competition started to arrive at this circuit with the arrival of the Japanese Touring Car Championship. But Tanaka had his eyes set on a much more ambitious goal for his new and shiny circuit, nothing less than hosting a Formula 1 Grand Prix. To achieve this goal, you had to know how to sweet-talk Bernie Ecclestone, the owner of the top category's commercial rights. But the thing here is that Mr. Tanaka had it very easy to convince him, since Bernie Ecclestone wanted more rounds in Asia that would bring more money to the category. And Japan was an extremely lucrative market, where Formula was exponentially popular and a resounding success with the victories that Honda was achieving in the top category of motorsport. The entry of Japanese drivers and the popularity of stars like Ayrton Senna, who were beloved. In Japan, television screens often showed people eager to watch top motorsport races and carriages. The Grand Prix was also a big success. Suzuka back then had competition, and the demand for tickets was so huge that on several occasions they had to hold a lottery. Who would get the chance to buy one of those tickets? There was demand to watch the Japanese Grand Prix live, which led to the idea of hosting a second Grand Prix in the country. This is what Tanaka envisioned, and he convinced Bernie Ecclestone of the idea. He also convinced the government of Okayama Prefecture, which provided resources to make this idea a reality. Thus, in 1994, the Pacific Grand Prix was established, becoming Japan's second race with this name. Suzuka owned the official Japanese Grand Prix, and Formula One only allows one Grand Prix per country. To address this, the category assigns different names to other Grands Prix in the same region. Okayama hosted its first Grand Prix in 1994. Formula One and the drivers faced a technical circuit that made overtaking very hard. And it saw two easy victories for Michael Schumacher, the winner of the 1994 and 1995 editions of this Grand Prix. How was their show? The races were really processional, with little action, due to the characteristics of this circuit, whose corners and short straights were not very conducive to battles in the category. And after the 1995 edition, Formula One left and never again saw top-tier action at this circuit. Now then, let's move on to the first question about this circuit. Why did Formula One leave the Okayama circuit? There are a few specific reasons we need to discuss. First, although the circuit was nice and challenging, it had its issues. It was built in a remote area where God passed by with his eyes closed. There was absolutely nothing around the track, and the nearest cities were hundreds of kilometers away from the circuit. And to get there, you had to travel a long stretch of extremely narrow rural roads, so imagine the chaos of moving not only the Formula One staff, but also the fans, since there were practically no hotels nearby, not even in the closest city to the circuit. That is to say, AIDA had enough hotel capacity to support the many fans who wanted to attend the event. So, logistically speaking, this Grand Prix was a mess year after year. But financially, it hasn't brought in big profits since joining the Formula One calendar. It also coincided with the fact that the popularity of the big circus in Japan began to drop drastically because Honda withdrew from the category. Ayrton Senna passed away in 1994. In Japan, the economic bubble burst, seriously impacting event organization, so the Okayama government and Mr. Tanaka, after 2 editions, they realized that the experiment of bringing Formula One to this region was not going to work, and before organizing another Grand Prix that would result in more economic losses, they decided to leave the calendar for the 1996 season, and after that, the one for the season. Now then, it's time to answer the main question from the title of the video. What was the fate of this Okayama circuit? Well, the track still exists today, but it's mainly used by national motorsport categories, with very little presence of international championships. Besides Formula One, key events at this circuit included the Japanese Super Formula Championship, which left in a certain year, and the WTSC Championship, held there from last year to this year. But nowadays, it's mostly used by car enthusiasts from some lower Japanese categories. Mr. Tanaka had to sell the circuit in 2003 due to a financial crisis, leading to new ownership. This change meant it lost its traditional name, Aida Tai Circuit, and adopted the name it has today. But the track itself still exists, it's still being used, although it no longer has as much presence in the world of motorsport competitions. And obviously, in case you're wondering, it's still in the middle of nowhere. So, knowing this, is it possible that Formula could return to this circuit in the future? Absolutely not. Not only has the circuit fallen behind with time, but this has also made it lose its Grade 1 certification, and now it only has a Grade 2 certification. If Formula One wanted a second round in Japan, there are better circuits in better locations here. Although the area's road network has improved since the Pacific Grand Prix, the circuit still faces the same issues. The track is isolated, far from civilization, and transportation would still be difficult. Additionally, the track's financial situation is barely strong enough to host Formula One, and that there really isn't any interest from the Okayama prefecture in having a Grand Prix and everything that comes with it. It seems impossible for this circuit to host Formula One again, not in the short, medium, or long term. So the last Formula One race was seen in 1995, and unless an absolute miracle happens, that's not going to change at any point in history. Next, we'll discuss another project in the United States that, like many then, didn't work out. Another circuit created from the push to host Grand Prix races in America, but this time will be in the state of Arizona from 1989 to 1991 with the biggest motorsport category in the world. It visited the streets of Phoenix, which was the host of the United States Grand Prix during those 3 seasons on the street circuit, which was another one of those Grand Prix events that started as ambitious experiments to attract Formula One to the giant North American country, but crashed hard into the wall. But to tell you about this failure, let's start at the beginning of our story. The idea for this competition came from the City Council and the Mayor's Office of Phoenix. They aimed to revitalize the city center and attract residents to an area mostly ignored due to its lack of appeal. They consulted real estate developer Howard Pinn, who suggested hosting a motorsport competition to make the area more attractive. Seeing that these kinds of experiments had worked in other parts of the United States, more precisely in Long Beach, during the 1980s and in the following years, they evaluated the possibility of creating a street circuit, obviously in the downtown area of this city, and tried to bring in the most exciting categories of the moment, like International Motorsports Association and IndyCar. Or did they also have the idea of skipping the intermediate steps and bringing formula racing directly, like I mentioned? The people from Phoenix relied heavily on the Long Beach project, which worked very well at the time, to reposition the city's image. With a Formula One race? Do you remember the video we made? They hired Chris Puck, who led the Long Beach project, to assess if that success could be repeated. But in Phoenix, and together, they came to the conclusion that yes, this was indeed the way to revitalize the image of the city's downtown. So over the following years, they gathered a budget through private financing and public resources. With this, they met Bernie Ecclestone to secure their American date. Because Detroit no longer wanted to host Formula events, for reasons we'll explain elsewhere, Arizona had the chance to host its Grand Prix. The agreement was finalized for 5 years, giving downtown Phoenix a race circuit to host top motorsports starting in 1989. This agreement was finalized on January 13, 1989, and the race was scheduled to take place on June 4 of that same year, giving the organizers just under 5 months to set up the circuit, grandstands, and pit buildings. And yes, this already sounds completely absurd, especially if we take into account that around that time, Phoenix is like an oven and the temperatures are extremely high. But regardless, despite all the rush, this track was going to be built and managed to be finished despite the rush, resulting in a 0.8-kilometer circuit obviously located in the city center, just as originally planned. And well, they did it, they made it, they finished the circuit and managed to secure a spot on the calendar. The street circuit was full of 90-degree turns, which drivers criticized for being very flat. Although that's true, the wide streets and the long straights favored overtaking. On this track, you could witness spectacular battles, such as Senna vs Gianalesi in 1991. Oh, and of course, a huge carnage of cars that either crashed or had reliability problems. That added excitement to races with few finishers and uncertain results. By 1991, the circuit was redesigned, shortened, and the corners on E. Monroy Street and 5th Street were removed, due to the construction of the basketball stadium for the Phoenix Suns. But really, with this change, the circuit didn't change much and there wasn't much that could be done, given the resources they had. And during those 3 seasons, the top winner was Ayrton Senna, who took the victories in 1990 and 1991, but after that Grand Prix in 91. And despite Senna's great battle against Leslie and having a 5-year contract with the top category, in the end, Formula One ended up leaving the city and has never returned to this day. Let's move on to the first question. Why did Formula One leave the Phoenix circuit? The quick answer is because any street food stand in your country was better prepared and organized than the geniuses who organized this competition. The public was expected to fill the stands, making the event a commercial success. But in its first year, it was held in June, one of the hottest months when people avoided outdoor events. After this failure, the date was moved in later years to avoid the hot season, but attendance still remained low. Bernie Ecclestone blamed the circuit for only having 20,000 seats, leading to much lower attendance than Formula One expected. So even though they moved the date to a time when the temperature was much lower, and despite having changed the date, attendance was still low. And there were rumors that Bernie Ecclestone was negotiating with Manhattan and Las Vegas to move the Grand Prix there, although this never actually happened. However, despite the failure that the years 89, 90, and 91 turned out to be, the organizers still wanted to keep their Grand Prix. But the category itself told them, "Thanks, but we're leaving." The organizers had their contract cancelled without explanation, and the final 2 years were not fulfilled. Formula One broke the contract. Did organizers get compensation? And so, Phoenix and its circuit disappeared from the calendar, leaving our protagonists all dressed up and definitely very upset, realizing that Bernie really played them rich. What happened to the Phoenix Street Circuit? After the major failure, the track became unusable and no competitions were considered to replace Formula One. American series like NASCAR and IndyCar used the oval at Phoenix Raceway, which was better located and had superior facilities. This really left no interest in having the city center host motor events again. And like every Formula circuit, that might have generated some interest or events. Few memories remain of what that circuit was, including a mural on Central Avenue, about a kilometer away, honoring the greatest winner, Ayrton Senna. In 2007, there was an attempt to revive downtown racing with a proposed street competition for the Champ Car World Series. However, this never happened due to budget constraints, and they weren't going to use this circuit anyway. Basically, in the end, the circuit simply ceased to exist and was never used again for any other competition. Understanding everything that happened, the answer is obvious, but we have to ask, could Formula return to this circuit? Absolutely not. Formula One won't return to this circuit, and the category probably isn't interested in this city anymore. Despite the Formula boom in the United States, if the Grand Circus wanted a fourth North American race, they'd likely prioritize cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, or the Indianapolis circuit. Also, Arizona hasn't shown interest in bringing Formula One back in recent years. So the answer is pretty obvious, since it's not a priority for the top category and there's practically no interest from the region. I think Formula One will remain very distant from Phoenix, and definitely even if Formula One ever returned to Arizona, they wouldn't come back to this circuit, so Formula One and Phoenix will stay separated. In their particular breakup, where neither of them was happy, neither wants to repeat the experience, and of what once was, a circuit that was the venue for the United States Grand Prix. Today, it hardly exists and likely never will again. To close, with today's episode, let's take our final trip to a continent Formula has targeted in recent years. If you're sharp, you'll know it's Africa, and we're heading specifically to South Africa to talk to you about a circuit. Located in the province of Gauteng, South Africa hosted a Formula One Grand Prix from 1962 to 1993, though not continuously. The first races held in this country took place on the East London Street Circuit, known as the Prince George Circuit, from 1967 to 1993. The home of this Grand Prix was the Kyalami Circuit. The history of this track, known for many years as the heart of African motorsport, dates back to the 1960s, a year when local enthusiasts aimed to build facilities to meet motorsport interest and replace the old East London Circuit. One of the local drivers, Alex Blinknout, originally from Johannesburg, was in charge of studying the project for the construction of a racetrack to be located in this city. There was so much passion to create a motor complex that Johannesburg's mayor, Dave Marray, arranged a meeting with enthusiasts to found the South African Motor Club. With that, we can move forward with creating a racetrack. There was interest from several parties in making it a reality, and many locations within the city were considered for its construction. But in the end, it was decided that the circuit would be built in a mountainous area known as Kyalami, and in October of 1961, the first version of this circuit was created. It was a track that measured 4.094 kilometers, combining long straights with wide curves and a lot of elevation changes. It opened with a 9-hour competition and the Randy Spring Trophy race. Thanks to the circuit's proximity to Johannesburg, every competition held there was a resounding success. Above all, the circuit had very good tracks, thanks to the grandstands that were very well planned and designed, and thanks to the successes that this competition had. And taking advantage of a visit from the authorities of the international motor world, they managed to bring Formula One in 1967, when South Africa once again had a Formula One competition. But now, on this particular circuit, which quickly won the hearts of fans and drivers who highly praised the track, they emphasized how challenging it was, and the was held on the circuit and was held and held on and was held on the circuit and held on the circuit, and it was held on the circuit and the circuit. And it was held on the circuit, and it was held on the circuit, held on the circuit and held the circuit. In extreme depressions it Filled with political tension, apartheid ended in 1991. Does it seem so? So, in an attempt to save the track, half of the land where the circuit was located ended up being sold and another complex was built that would completely change its design radically, turning it into a much slower and more technical track, but at the same time it still remained a challenge. This enabled international competitions to return to the renovated Kyalami and led to an agreement for Formula to come back to the circuit. In 1992 and 1993, two well-received races took place, raising expectations for South Africa's continued presence in the category. But after the 1993 edition, Formula One left this country, and to this day its return has not been possible in what was once known as the heart of African motorsport. Now then, let's move on to the first question. Why did Formula One leave the Kyalami circuit? In short, financial problems and the race promoter's fraud arrest forced the circuit to be sold to the South African Automobile Association. Although they saved the track, securing enough budget for a Formula competition was nearly impossible. It was impossible without government support, private funding, and with their limited resources. The circuit owners couldn't meet the category's high financial demands to host a Grand Prix. They chose to step aside and not participate in the season. This story can be summed up in two very simple situations: money and corruption, which ended up killing the possible return of South Africa to the Formula calendar. Given that, what happened to the South African circuit? Fortunately for motorsport in the region, the circuit still exists despite earlier statements. For many years, the circuit survived by becoming an exhibition center and thanks to local races. However, the circuit has changed hands many times. After the required 1993 sale, the track was auctioned in 2014 and is now owned by Porsche's president in South Africa. The circuit now hosts German brand events and continues to hold motorsport events. In addition, in 2015 it underwent a major renovation that resulted in a modernized look and improved track safety. And thanks to this, it now has a Grade 2 accreditation, which allows it to host international events except for Formula One. So the track still exists and is still very busy, both for races and for testing vehicles by people from South Africa. And now it's time for the last question of the day. The circuit. What happened to the circuit? What? Sorry, did I mess up the circuit? Who set up the circuit? Who set up the circuit? Who set up the circuit? Who the circuit and the Formula calendar? In 2022, this circuit was expected to replace the Belgian Grand Prix, but negotiations fell through. Because the circuit needs to be modernized to upgrade it to Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile Grade 1 certification, and with that be able to host the top category. This effectively halted discussions about South Africa's return to Formula One, and for years interest appeared to fade. In 2025, they submitted a remodeling plan to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile for the Grade 1 license, which the organization approved. What exactly do they need to change to get this certification? It's less about layout and more about actual changes needed. It's the runoff areas, barriers, circuit drainage, and expanded pit and paddock facilities. If they finish the renovation and reach a deal with Formula One, it could end a drought of over 30 years without the South African Grand Prix. So there is interest from both sides in making specifications, which means the answer is yes. Formula One could return to South Africa and this circuit, but the path is difficult with many obstacles. But the possibility exists, and it's very real that Kyalami could come back to life in a few years. Formula One. It doesn't look like a remote possibility, it looks like a very real one, but there's still a long way to go for both parties to reach an agreement. This will seal the top category's great ambition from the circuit. But ladies and gentlemen, with that, we finished the second chapter of the remake of the fate of the circuits that left Formula One. But this is what I ask you, did you know the story of any of these circuits? Would you like any of them to return to Formula One? And which circuits would you like? For the third chapter? When we release that part of the mini-series, let me know all your opinions in the comments section. That's all from me. I say goodbye by telling you that if you liked this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this with your friends as well. So, I invite you to follow us on our Instagram and Twitter accounts. The links will be in the description of this video, and I'll see you in the next video soon. For more automotive content here on your channel Skyline Racing, thank you for tuning in. See you next time.